and welcome to Lectionary Q. I'm Dennis Sanders, the pastor of First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Roseville, Minnesota. And welcome to this special Holy Week edition of Lectionary Q. I'm doing an extra episode this week that is focused on Maundy, Thursday. So, as I always like to say at every podcast here, the Q stands for questions, because that's what we do every week. We take one of the scriptures from the Revised Common Lectionary for the upcoming Sunday, but of course, this time we're not doing it for a Sunday, and we ask some questions. There are a lot of different ways that you can use this. You can use this as kind of a lead off for a Bible study, and there are questions that are included here. This is also a way for pastors to prepare for their Sunday sermons. As I said, it can be used for a Bible study, and pastors and the laity can do that. And it can also be used as a time for your devotions. If you want to use this to kind of as a time with God, to reflect on what God is saying to you, it can be used for that as well. So these are the questions for Thursday, March 28th, 2024, which is Maundy, Thursday. The text that we are looking for at this week is John 13, 1 through 17, and then 31 through 35. And the reflection that I will be using today will be one that is called, he washed the feet of washing the feet of Judas. And I will begin with the reflection, and then we'll be asking some questions. Shortly after Francis became Pope, he did something that people found quite shocking. On a Maundy, Thursday, he decided to wash people's feet. Now, foot washing is a common practice on Maundy, Thursday, so that wasn't a big deal. What was a big deal was whose feet he washed. It was the feet of juvenile delinquents. Now, someone was watching, and as I said, many were watching Francis when he decided to do this. And the people that were one of the people that were watching were more other juvenile delinquents 2 continents away in Los Angeles. Many of them wrote letters to the Pope, and they went like this one: "Thank you for washing the feet of youth like us in Italy. We are also young and made mistakes. Society has given up on us. Thank you for that you have not given up on us." You can hear the desire in these young kids to be loved, even with all of what they have done and who they have hurt. They want someone, anyone, that will love them unconditionally. Jesus has one last dinner before he is taken away, tortured, and crucified. Imagine that the dinner is finished and the dishes are cleared. Jesus gets up, takes off his outer robe, grabs a towel and a basin of water, and starts to wash the disciples' feet. The disciples freak out. Why? Because foot washing was an act of hospitality offered to guests after their journey. And what makes Jesus' act so scandalous is the fact of foot washing was performed either by the guests themselves or by a slave or servant. This was considered a menial task, and Jesus here was showing what it meant to be a disciple. The way of the world was one where leaders would sit in places of honor, while those below them would be the ones that would wash their feet. But Jesus flips the script. "You call me teacher and Lord, and you speak correctly, for I am," Jesus says in the text. Teacher and Lord were titles that in that world meant something to people. It meant that person was important and that they were to be served. But Jesus reverses the meaning. To be Lord is to show love and service. "As I have done, so you must do," Jesus says, telling the disciples that they must do, that this is what they must do if they claim to follow Jesus. Now, at the same time all of this is happening, Satan enters into Judas, and Judas would soon betray Jesus. Jesus knows all of this, and he tells the disciples, "You are all clean, but not all of you." Because Judas didn't believe, Judas was not pure. If we are to continue reading John 13, we would see that Jesus exposes Judas as the betrayer. Now, Judas is an interesting character in all of the Gospels. The different writers treat Judas differently. In Matthew, Judas shows some remorse and returns the money he received for handing Jesus over to the authorities. But in John, Judas is a far more nefarious character. Over the years, people have tried to explain why Judas did what he did. I can remember one theologian ignoring all the excuses and thinking that pastors should just preach what John preaches, that Satan used a quote-unquote despicable weakling, unquote. But Judas was nothing and should be treated as such. But that is not how Jesus treats Judas. It's not written down. It's more implicit than explicit, but Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, even Peter, who protested what Jesus was doing. And you know who else had his feet washed? Judas. Jesus showed love to the one who would soon betray him. The one who would soon reject Jesus and send him to his death was the one whose feet were washed by Jesus. The first verse of today's passage is that Jesus loved his disciples to the end. Jesus would go to any length to show his love to his disciples, even when they denied him, like Peter, and even like Judas, who betrayed him. Later in chapter 13, Jesus tells his disciples to love one another. And that's nice to hear, but it's so much harder to put into practice. It's easy to love people you already love. It's harder to love someone who may not love you back. It's harder to love someone who might hurt you. And it's harder to love someone who does things you don't approve of. But here was Jesus, washing the feet of his disciples, even the one who tried to betray him. To be a servant like Jesus is to be a servant to everyone. Jesus was in solidarity with all of creation. Jesus chose to love even when creation didn't love him back. Who do you love? What does it mean to love those outside the doors of the church? What does it mean to love those who are not always so easy to love? And can we wash the unlovable's feet? The fact that Jesus washed the feet of his friends, even of the betrayer, is a sign of the overflowing love of God, even for the one who did not deserve it. Whose feet are we willing to wash? And now here are the questions. The washing of feet only happens in John. It's central to the Last Supper. Whereas in the other three Gospels, what's central is communion. Why do you think the writer of John chose to share this act instead of communion? Number 2, after washing their feet, Jesus said that all of the disciples have been washed, but not all are clean, referring to Judas. Why would washing his feet not make him clean? Number 3, Jesus tells the disciples that they are to follow his example and wash each other's feet. The phrase could mean learning to serve each other. What are some examples of washing each other's feet that you've seen in your life? Number 4, Jesus calls on the disciples to love one another. Was he referring just to their group, or was he referring to even beyond their group? And what does this phrase mean today? Number 5, Pope Francis took today's text, to mean washing the feet of people like young offenders. Who are the people today that God might be calling us to wash their feet? So what are your questions? What are your answers? If you ever feel brave enough, feel free to write down your questions or answers and send them to me. And you can do that by going to lectionaryq at substack.com. And I would also suggest that you subscribe to Lectionary Q, and you can go do that by going to the website at lectionaryq.substack.com. Well, that is it for this edition of Lectionary Q for Maundy, Thursday, 2024. My name is Dennis Sanders. Thank you for listening. I hope to hear, I would love to hear from you. I hope that you are having a good Holy Week. May God be with you all. And again, my name is Dennis Sanders. I'm your host. Take care, Godspeed, and I will see you in the next episode.